welcome to The Feast Life, where we empower you, the modern homeschool mom, to create a life and homeschool you love. I'm Julie Ross, the creator of the award-winning curriculum A Gentle Feast, a homeschool veteran of over 20 years, and a certified Christian life coach. Charlotte Mason said, life should be all living, not a mere tedious passing of time. So on this show, we seek to savor the feast of life. So go get your favorite beverage and pull up a chair. You're welcome at this table. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Feast Life. I'm your host, Julie Ross, and today I'm so excited to introduce you to a dear new friend that I met, Calli Birch. Hey, Calli.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you because I get asked all the time about teaching high school English. I don't know. I think sometimes homeschool parents are more intimidated by high school English than they are high school math and science. I don't
Wow.
know why that is, because I'm intimidated by high school math and science, but
Me too.
and I think a lot of other people do too. But high school English, I feel like I should be able to teach this, but I'm
Yeah.
really scared to teach this.
Mhm.
Have you had that experience with parents at all?
I have definitely with my current students that I'm teaching that are homeschool students. But even back when I was in the traditional classroom in a private school, I often heard that from parents whenever I would discuss with them something about, I don't know, their students' progress or a text that we were reading together or something specific about a paper that they'd written. They would just say something like, oh, I was horrible in English, or oh, I'm scared of English, or I don't know anything about that book,
Yep.
and just write it off. And and that always made me curious because then I'm thinking, like, what kind of English education did you have that you would feel like you're bad at it or that you don't like it? Because it's human nature to love stories, right?
Yes. But I think a lot of us got that taught out of us by having to, at least from my experience, dissect poetry or read Shakespeare and analyze it to death, killed all the joy of it. So I think a lot of parents
Yeah,
have that, or
it's
maybe
unfortunate.
they were like me in the dark ages when we had to use typewriters, and I would pour my heart and soul into some paper, and then my teacher would take a red pen to it. And I've
Mhm.
always been horrible at spelling, and so they would just mark that whole thing up. And so, yeah, I think a lot of us maybe have some English trauma, but
Right. Well, but bleed all over the paper is the thing they
yes,
used to say, right?
I
There's
hope
a reason I've
we can
never
help
used
people
red when
kind of,
marking on papers.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's smart. I
Yeah.
hope we can kind of help some parents work through that and
Yeah.
know that they can help teach their kid high school English, but they can also develop a love for it for themselves as well, which is really,
Absolutely. Yes.
yeah. So
Mm.
before we get started, can you tell everyone just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. So I fell in love with books at a young age. I think the first earliest memories I have with just independent reading, as far as being immersed in a book, was with Anna Green Gables. And that was when my family had moved from Tennessee to Texas, and I was in a new town in sixth grade and didn't know anybody. And it was really a little bit out of loneliness that I fell in love with Anne.
Yes.
And I devoured the entire series. And I remember that experience showing me that books can be friends and that books can help us through hard things. And I have this sweet little journal entry from that year where I said something to the effect of, is it weird that I think Anne is my friend?
Well,
I
Anne's
know
my
she's
friend too, girl.
yeah, I was like, I know she's a fictional character, but I just feel like we're so much alike. And that was the first time that I really experienced the concept of a book being a mirror and giving me a glimpse into my own life and my own identity formation, as Anne was also very lonely and isolated at the beginning of the
Yeah.
story. And then when I saw her navigate friendships, I too wanted to try to go out into the world and make friends. And I just looking back, I see that series as so formative as it gave me courage, is what it really did. And then moving forward, I was a voracious reader from that point on. I'm grateful we were in I was in a public school educated. I did have 1 year of homeschooling when my family lived in Guatemala. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I had some really good English teachers. I will say the little school system we were in, a small town, had some just lovely people who were there, the reading, language arts, and English teachers. And they always were my favorite teacher. And so moving forward, my 10th grade year, my dad is a doctor, and my family went and did medical missions in Guatemala. And we lived in a very remote village.
Wow.
And I homeschooled for that year. And so I got a taste of home education that way. My best friend in high school was a homeschooler. So I had all these really positive associations with homeschooling because of that. And that is part of the reason that I have chosen home education as a part of my children's educational journey. But that year, I really self-educated a lot. I was a bit of an autodidact, but I did correspondence homeschool with a Becca and like a private school out of Florida, because back then you had to actually mail in paperwork.
Yes.
And my mom had really good advice from an uncle who was a voracious reader himself and was a teacher. And he said, just pack a suitcase of classic novels and just let Callie read all year long. That
Mm.
will be the best education she can
Yep,
have.
agree.
And so while I did do the correspondence school, it was geometry that year for math, and that that was not fun to do it all by myself
Yeah,
with
no.
no teacher. I was quite lost, but everything else went really well. But I read through all of these classic novels. He had given her a book list, and my mom just went and bought them all and packed them, brought them, and then I read them that year. And so I came back my junior year. We were only there for 1 year. And I came back my junior year with this appetite for great books, for just really wonderful, high quality literature. And thank goodness my junior and senior year AP English teachers were some of the best teachers of definitely of high school experience. And so when I finished my senior year after AP English, having a really inspiring teacher and experience, I knew I wanted to be an English major, and that I wanted to be able to continue this exploration of great literature. And then I saw what she did, and I wanted to do something like that. I also watched Dead Poet Society at some point in that, and that really lit a fire in me. It gave me so much inspiration. I'm going to be him.
Yes. I love that
It's
movie.
the most inspiring, heart-wrenching movie.
Yes.
So well done. And I fast forward several years later, and I actually was teaching in an independent all-girls school that was basically the female version of Dead Poet Society in
This
Dallas,
one in
Texas.
England?
No, this is the one in Dallas.
Okay, okay.
I did teach in England. I taught in England in the British education system for a year, and that was amazing. And I learned so much because they do things quite differently than we do. And that was actually my first year formally as a contract employee
Yeah.
in the classroom. I had
Wow.
done student
Amazing
teaching
experience.
before that. And then I taught in this all-girl preparatory school in Dallas. It's a pretty elite institute with a low acceptance rate. And it was a trial by fire through that experience. And I learned very quickly. I was doing my master's degree at the same time, and I learned very quickly that these girls were so bright and so well educated and knew a lot of the answers really quickly and easily, that I had to engage them differently. And so within about a year of being there, I completely overhauled my educational philosophy from a teacher-centric kind of sage on the stage kind of concept of I must know all the answers. They are the vessel and I am pouring truth into their minds, to something that was very different, that was more student-led and about lighting a fire and fanning that fire, or as Charlotte Mason would say, laying a feast before them and us grazing upon the feast together.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot changed then. And since then, I moved to Arkansas, into a very small town that did not have good schools. And that was when I chose to home educate my daughters when they were young. It was a wonderful experience. We used the Charlotte Mason philosophy. We loved it so much. And then in 2020, at the height of COVID, I got an invitation from a former colleague who was the department chair of an English department at one of the top private schools in Little Rock, to come teach English there. And so I went back to the classroom with my daughter's blessing. They wanted to try out private school, and we were there for 3 years. And I got to teach junior and senior level English there, and also was very involved in creating new curriculum for semester seminar courses at the junior and senior level. And I loved it. It was a wonderful experience. But as my daughter reached high school and through just a lot of just things that she was just contemplating with what her life goals, she came to me as an eighth grader and said, Mom, I want to homeschool again. Would you be willing to homeschool? And I was blindsided by it. But whenever she came to me with that proposal, and there was more to it than that. She explained to me her vision for her life and her goals. It was really beautiful, and it made me very proud of her. And so it was not just a naive perspective. And so I tried to dream up a way to make that happen. And so I started Story Weaver Co. this last summer, which is a way that I can bring my English teaching expertise, but also just love for great books and love for discussing great books with teenagers to other homeschool families while I'm teaching my own kids. So
Yeah,
I hope that wasn't too long-winded.
no, that's great. I think it definitely shows like your passion for the subject and just the way that God has weaved, using your term for your
Yes.
brand,
Yes.
weaved your story together and brought you to this point. And so now you can share some of that experience with the students that you taught and with your own children and bring that to other
Right.
people, which is really cool. So I really want to focus today on helping parents kind of work through some of the roadblocks that they have when it comes to teaching English. We all say,
Right.
I want my kids to love great books. How do I
Right.
get my kids to love great books? And then feel this pressure in high school to give them
Right.
this kind of curriculum where we can check off all the boxes and go, okay, you have
Right.
English 1 class, high school credit now, and don't realize that the methods that we're going about it are actually counterproductive to the results that we want to get. How do you go about in teaching your classes, instilling this love for literature in your students?
Thank you for asking that. I think the first part is to start with where teens are at and there's many places you can start, but teens, they're just so wonderful. They are the most wonderful. I love teenagers so much. They are not children anymore, and they can think these higher level thoughts. That prefrontal cortex is really developing and working hard, but they're not adults either. And they crave authenticity and meaning, but they can also sniff out an agenda and manipulation a mile away. And they hate being forced to do things.
Oh,
So they they have to have buy-in.
yeah.
And I'm not saying that everything we're always going to do is going to have their buy-in. Sometimes we do have to encourage them and prod them along. But when we can get buy-in, it's a game changer. And so when we can show them that classic literature gives them a safe place to ask big questions and to explore the universal qualities of the human experience and contemplate these big things that they are already contemplating, that they are already thinking about in their lives, but it gives them a little bit of distance from their lives so that they feel safe. It gives them the perfect opportunity to do this. And literature, especially when you take a thematic approach, that's my main way that I look at teaching literature, is looking at it through the lens of theme and character.
Okay.
Then that gives them a way to discuss. I'll give you an example. So just this last semester, I worked through. Sometimes I don't even like to say the word taught, even though I do teach a lot of
Yeah.
things about the text that we're reading. But I also see myself as a guide. So I'm guiding my students through. We worked through Frankenstein and Macbeth. And both of these texts have, as one of their core central themes, isolation, the isolation of the individual. And sure, I could have given them a slideshow at the beginning or given them some notes they had to
Yeah.
take. Here is one of the themes of Frankenstein. And then they just jot it down. And
Sound like
that is
Frankenstein when you said
mindless.
it.
Yeah. And that means so little to them. But I get them to probe the text and I have them discover the theme as it's emerging.
Mhm.
And then once they discover the theme, then we're really into talking about Victor Frankenstein and how he isolates himself in his studies. And what does that mean when he cuts himself off from his family? Or about Macbeth when he pushes away everyone, especially Banquo, who is his moral compass in the story. And then we start talking about what does it mean when people push away family and friends? Why
Mhm.
do people isolate? And you know what? That is a topic that is super relevant in their life.
Oh, yeah.
The current teenagers all have vivid memories of COVID.
Right.
And so isolation is also just relevant for that reason.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's my probably my biggest tip is to not teach English as content mastery.
Okay.
Now, of course, we want them to have a grasp on grammatical skills and I can mention that later with the writing. Having mastery of language and structure is going to make them a stronger writer. But specifically when we're talking about classic books and literature, if we treat it more like an invitation for experience
Hmm.
and to discuss meaningful things, instead of content to be memorized or content to learn,
Hmm.
such as when they go on to college, sure, it's wonderful if they know the what a tragic hero is or the essential plot points in Macbeth or Frankenstein. Yeah, that's nice. I
Hmm.
would like that, but it is not
Yeah.
essential. What is
Right.
essential is that they've learned how to read deeply, to think critically, and to ask good questions as they're doing that in the process, to develop empathy and compassion by literature also being, I talked about it being a mirror earlier when I was reading Anna Green Gables, but it's also a window.
Yeah.
I'm about to start reading Night, Elie Wiesel's
Yeah.
Holocaust
Yeah.
memoir with my students. It's one of my favorite things I've ever taught. Now, of course,
Yeah.
it's not fiction.
Yes, it's a hard read.
But it's a very hard read, but it's poignant, it's
Oh, yeah.
powerful,
Yes.
and I dare someone to come out on the other end anti-Semitic.
Right. Right.
It is so empathy building. And Elie Wiesel is a teenager in the story.
Mhm.
And he's about the same age as the
Yeah.
kids who are reading it when you read it with teens. And it's that whole idea of walking a mile in someone else's shoes and being able to see the world through their own lens. It's really hard to other. It's really hard to hold and carry prejudice whenever you have seen the world through someone else's story. And that empathy building compassion is something that's so unique to story.
Yeah.
And I think one of the greatest blessings that literature has gives us and something I like to lean into.
Yeah. Those are such great points. And I think when parents are asking that question of like, how can I make my child love classic literature? You can't actually make anybody love anything, but
Yeah.
you can do your part, which is laying
Mm.
out the feast, making it inviting,
Yes.
right? Picking
Mm-hmm.
stories that can, where they have characters that they can build those connections
Right.
to and build that empathy.
Mm-hmm.
But I hear from parents a lot of, what if I haven't read the book? Like, how can we
Right.
discuss the theme of Frankenstein or
Mm-hmm.
Macbeth? That sounds really great, but I don't know Macbeth or Frankenstein, so do I? And I don't really have the time because I'm also homeschooling all these other children and trying to teach this kid how to read and make sure we all eat
Mm-hmm.
dinner. How do I do
Mm-hmm.
that? And then have this discussion with my high schooler so that they can find this theme in Macbeth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
question. Okay, first I'll start with I agree that we can't always read what our kids are reading. And I know that last year when I was still in the classroom and my daughter was reading some other things with her English teacher when we were still in the private school, I wasn't reading everything alongside her. I didn't have the capacity to do that and prepare for all my lessons and everything else that I was reading. And now I will say a few of the texts I'd already read,
Yeah.
so I knew them and I was
Yeah.
able to talk to her about it. That is helpful.
Yeah.
But I do think learning to ask open-ended questions about the text that students
Absolutely.
are reading. And one of my favorite things I've done in the past to try to avoid having to give reading quizzes when I taught over 100 students is to ask students their favorite passage from their moment of the reading they had done the homework the night before. Now it took some time to get around the room, or sometimes I would just say, let's do that just two people today. And then they would read the passage for me, and then they knew that basically then they were to share why that stood out to them, why that was important. It was such a great way for me to gauge whether people read. It was a great way for me to gauge gauge kind of where their minds were in the story and what they were focusing on. But it really showed me what stood out to them as valuable in the story that maybe is not the thing I was planning on focusing on that
Yeah,
day.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
sometimes that would actually completely pivot our class discussion. I'll talk in a minute about students creating their own discussion questions instead of giving a list of discussions questions to answer. It's something I strongly believe in. But first, to answer your question about homeschool moms or parents who are not able to read the book with them, I do want to encourage them to try to. I think we have some of the best audiobooks now. I think that you can get audiobooks for free through library memberships. And if you try to commit to reading, and usually they're reading at a relatively slow pace, maybe one book a month, something like that, is not typically hard to absorb in an audiobook. And so I do want to try to encourage them because it will be better. It will be improved if they can then say, oh, I just got to this part. And then you have this shared discussion. That's something I have loved so much with my teenager is she read The Hobbit last year for her independent reading just on her own. Actually, this is funny. The 8th grade curriculum had changed and Hobbit had been part of the curriculum for a decade. And then they changed it to something that was a lot simpler. And my daughter was frustrated by that. And she read the other book, but it was just something that she felt was just easy and not what she wanted to read. She was so excited about reading The Hobbit. And so she read it as her independent reading. And we had so many, and actually continue to have so many great conversations about The Hobbit because it lit up her imagination. And because I've read it as well, I was able to share that with her. So I think that you can also ask the student, your child, what is standing out to them or what they love, just basic open-ended questions that get them to think and and encourage them to share. And who is your favorite character? And they can always answer that question. That's an easy one.
Or if you were that character, how would you have done things differently? Or
that's exactly
and that builds
right.
that empathy too, is getting them the person who's in mind. And open-ended questions I think are so important. And I tell parents too, sometimes you can cheat. There are Spark Notes. There are YouTube summaries out there now.
There are a lot of YouTube summaries.
If you're really pressed for time, yes, I think it's ideal to be able to read them if you can. Like you said, it's a book a month. You can listen to it while you're doing dishes or out for a walk or whatever. But there are resources too, so that you're not completely like clueless of what it is that they're talking about. But have those discussions, I think, is so fun. Just having this discussion with you, I miss my 2 adult children. We just had the best going to coffee shops and talking about books or my daughter would just come downstairs and be like, Mom, I cannot believe that Mr. Darcy said blah, 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 blah. Like whatever. And it wasn't just a read this and then come, or when my kids were teenagers, I let them record their
answer my questions about it.
I never did the questions, but they could record their narration on the phone or they could write their narration, but the discussion is so key, especially at this age. They're asking big questions, they're thinking big ideas. And so if you're only narrating, you're missing out on this. So you don't have to discuss every day with them. They can wait till they're halfway through the book or at the end of the book and have a big coffee chat or something.
It's one of my favorite things is to invite my teenage daughter on a coffee date. She loves coffee shops, coffee houses. We very much have
vibes. Like it makes you want to talk about books.
It does. And we each get a little special drink. We sit in a cozy spot. We've already scouted out our favorite places here around where we live. And then just start asking her some questions about what she's reading. And we've had some of the most wonderful discussions. She enjoyed Frankenstein because, of course, she's in my class now. She enjoyed Frankenstein way more than she thought she would. And we had so many conversations. She's a very compassionate soul, and she did not like that the creature was never named. Of course, that's important to the story that he's never named. And so she started calling him Bob because she wanted to give him a name. Because we established in our household that Frankenstein's creature, Dr. Frankenstein's creature, because of course Frankenstein is not the monster, it's the doctor. His name was Bob. And so we talked about Bob. The bulk of the month of November, she was very consumed with conversations about Bob. It was so much fun. I loved it. And also just kids love to feel like you have set aside your phone and your other things in your time and all the things that vie for our attention, all of us. Every single one of us, and then just give them special focus and time. And I will say that it's hard to put a teen on the spot and be like, how is your life? That's not something that teens are usually going to respond to. They're just like, whoa,
that
a little
hasn't
too
worked real
personal.
well in my family either.
Back off.
Yeah.
But so literature just gives us this entry point.
That's a great
point.
Great point. Yeah. Breaks the ice, and then you can relay that back to, oh, he seemed really isolated. Do you ever struggle with that? Yeah.
Often they'll start once they feel safe, once they feel like comfortable.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, they'll just start telling you, well, I felt this before, before. That's what happens. Great literature, we read it, but it also reads us, and it informs us so much about who we are, even when we disagree with it. And that's what's so interesting, is that we can read about Dr. Frankenstein's, Victor's horrible decisions. And then we can come back, and it's because he made such horrible decisions that we can reflect on ourselves and be like, I don't want to isolate like that. I need my community. I need my people to help point me towards true north and to make good and ethical decisions. It was in the isolation that he made so many poor decisions and became obsessed.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. I hope this encourages parents. Yes, it doesn't have to be scary, because it really is focusing on the relationship. And that's what our teens need more than anything else.
The Charlotte Mason feast metaphor is perfect for that, because you said earlier, like, they may not like every book. Of course, if you had a feast laid out before you, that's just, think about a grand table full of, even like a Thanksgiving feast or a Christmas feast that has all these different varieties of amazing food. And every one of them, let's say it is baked perfectly according to the recipe, what it's supposed to be. It is exactly what a green bean casserole is supposed to be. It is exactly what it's. I'm showing my southernness here. What a sweet potato casserole is supposed to be. It is perfect. It is the most perfect recipe for that thing that is supposed to be. And I'm not actually saying that every classic book is perfection, but it is very high quality. That's why it stood the test of time. And it's engaging with these big topics and big questions. But you know what? They all have style. They all have form. They all have specific cultural context. And there are some things that our students are, and we ourselves are going to gravitate more towards and fall in love with. We may love green bean casserole, but just not really like the texture of sweet potato casserole. We might have a little bit of it on our plate, and we may acknowledge this is the best sweet potato casserole that's ever existed in the history of sweet potato casserole, but that doesn't mean we're going to love it. I love the Victorians. I love the way that I love rich descriptive language. I love the kinds of ideas that they were dealing with. I love the deep symbolism, and that's partly because they were so strict in their what they were allowed to express and to contemplate. And so there's all of this symbolism that's throughout it that I think it's so fun to decode. Some people can't stand the Victorians. Some people think they were so repressed and too wordy and the word you'll hear a lot is flowery. And they
I feel like that with the romantics. That's why I like the flower.
Yes. And they may love the more modernist style because it's more to the point. And they were the rebellion from the Victorian parents. So you see these pendulum swings of culture and style. And so modernist in so many ways are the opposite of, but the children of the Victorians. And so you see connections, but a super different style. And they may love, that may be their jam. I know people who just love, give them some T.S. Eliot or give them Virginia Woolf or whatever, but they're not going to want to read any Dickens or the Brontes. But at the same time, they've tasted all of it. And so they have a feel for what their preference is.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's key too. I think, so do you focus more on classics, or do you balance that with modern, or what's your approach towards selecting some of these books?
Good question. I will say with the high school course, I do emphasize the classics, and that includes more contemporary. I'm not going to say contemporary. I think the most recent thing I've taught was written in like the 1980s or something like that. And it was a short story.
Fahrenheit 451.
But so I might throw in some short stories that are more recent. But and I think it's important for them. And we'll read like news articles and things like that that are more contemporary. But I am looking at and considering and weighing. There's only so much time we have together, and there's only this short period we have them as high school students. And this may be one of their last opportunities to read some of these books. And if they don't have a little bit of a fire lit and a love for them developed in these years, that it may never happen. And so I just believe that this is an important season. I read contemporary books. I try to force myself to look at what are the current Pulitzer Prize winners. What are the books that are in our zeitgeist, in our current culture, that are like really igniting people's minds and conversations and causing people to think. And because those are the books that will ultimately be the classics of our period, because they're the writers who are engaged with the big ideas in the culture now. But it's not what I teach. They're too new.
I think we should
I like
focus on
classics have
Why do you think we should
they've stood
focus
the
on the
test of
classics then?
time.
Just because they're
Yeah.
timeless? What's the value of
They've stood the test of
incorporating?
time. Yeah. I will say in the middle school class, I might include, I am doing a more contemporary book with them. I just feel like it's a little bit different. I want them to just love reading. I want really high quality, just lovely middle grade fiction. And there's so much good stuff out there right now. So I will say middle school's different.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that the high school should include these books that have stood the test of time. They have references that you're going to see no matter what your child studies. And I think that's really key, because some people are like, well, my child wants to be an engineer. So do we really have to read some of these harder type books and these classical books if they don't really like them in high school? And like Charlotte Mason says, this is what, and what you said as well, it's these stories that shape a person's character. Doesn't matter what field they go into. The big ideas of humanity are timeless and they're bound in every field. People are everywhere. So yeah, that's a really great point. So let's shift gears a little bit from literature to the other part of English that makes us all want to crawl under the table, which is writing.
Writing. Oh, I love talking about writing.
You have red pen trauma. So to us as parents who may not feel that we are good writers, help our children as high schoolers to develop the writing skills they need in high school.
Right. I have grown over the years to strongly believe that we should start with personal narrative. And so I actually start with personal narrative pretty much. There may be an exception at some point, but in my curriculum that I've developed throughout the years and what I'm doing now with Storyweaver, I start with personal narrative with very open-ended prompts that allow students to engage with the prompt kind of at the place they can have all this variety of responses, because they can engage with it in the way that they are capable of engaging with it. And teens typically love to write about themselves. So that's already a win.
Right.
It's something they know and understand. They're not confused by, tell me about a moment in your life when you were brave.
Yeah, right.
That's going to take some reflection. That's going to take a time, some contemplation and brainstorming. What does it really mean to be brave? I had a prompt last year that was about the name of the paper. I like to name them. It was Sense of Place. We were really exploring how writers use place and setting to informing and the meaning of the story, and
Jane Eyre at the time,
and how. No, it was actually my Southern literature class. Oh gosh, Jane Eyre is massive. Like every setting is huge to her character development. Yeah, it's essential. But no, it was the Southern literature class. And so obviously it was Southern lit. So it was literally the literature of a place, right? And so it was, their prompt was something about telling me a story about a time when place was central to the moment and why it was significant. And I can't remember the exact wording of the prompt, but it was something like that. And man, the stories were literally all over the place, over the globe. Yeah, exactly. It was some important place in their home that was, and we talked about it could be something as simple as your bed. or a little chair or a nook in your home where you feel at peace. Or it could be a location, like it'd be your grandmother's house, your grandmother's garden, or good. And we talked about what would constitute a good story, and it took them some time and brainstorming to figure out their place. But the ones who figured it out and wrote with so much heart and so much passion, and this one in particular I'm thinking about, her grandmother had recently died, and she was really still grieving the death of the grandmother who had been very important to her life. And she wrote about her grandmother's kitchen and about them cooking together, and it was absolutely beautiful. And so it also gives students an opportunity to really probe their hearts and explore things they really care about.
Yeah.
But then writing in first person also helps them develop their voice. And then that will ultimately translate into their analytical and persuasive writing. I promise you.
Yeah.
When they can start hearing their own voice in their writing and saying, oh, that's me. That's my cadence. That's the way that I say things and express things. And then learn how to structure writing to be able to do that is huge. And to not feel like that there is a right or wrong way of doing things because that's what AI does, right? Like we are in an age of ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's a very
Voice
good
is the
point.
most
Yes.
that is what is going to make our
Yes.
writing stand
Yes.
out.
Yes.
It's that it's human, and the punctuation may not be perfect.
Yeah.
And there may be spelling errors, although now in the age of computers, it catches the majority of them.
I told my kids, I'm like, you guys don't realize how lucky you are. And I tell them my typewriter
It's
stories
so
and trying to
different.
white out things.
I wasn't a great speller either. Actually, my lowest grades in elementary school were typically spelling. So I get that. I've improved, I will say, teaching my kids phonics
Yeah.
and learning
Yep.
the phonetic approach, actually. And that was as an adult, years later. I had a master's degree at that point. My own spelling improved. I was like, oh, phonics, the thing I didn't
Yeah, that's the thing we
learn
didn't learn in the 70s.
because
Yeah, this is really helpful.
yeah, in the 80s as well. We did not learn phonics. And then I will say the practical thing about narrative, and I'll talk about analytical writing as well. But narrative, it is the form of writing that is the college application essay, the huge, massive thing that is ahead that is part of the application process. So if your student's college bound, college application essay is one of the most crucial aspects of the application process because it's the only thing you have complete control over. Nothing else. You don't know what questions you're going to get on the ACT or SAT? You don't know what your references are going to write in the recommendation letters? You can have you have a lot of influence,
Right.
and you have a lot of agency in these things, but the only thing you have complete control over is your voice and your topic choice in the college application essay. So learning how to write a strong personal narrative is very practically important if you're college bound.
No, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Before
Yeah.
we go to the analytical, I just want to say one thing that you brought up that I think is really key.
Yeah.
It is because I really do believe that AI and ChatGPT are going to be like what the internet was to us when we went to college, because it was so revolutionary. It was like, oh, I don't have to go to the
100%.
library and get out 75 books and read through them all and highlight things. And I can just type a thing into a little box and it gives me answers. Like it was like,
changed
whoa,
everything.
it changed everything about how I studied, because I was in college when the internet came out. So my freshman year, my senior year, everything looked totally different. And so I think for our kids, the papers and things that we had to write that they can now get in literally 30 seconds, they could get an essay on Beth. And
30
so
seconds.
if all I have to do is have an essay and I want it to be everything to be spelled right, and I want to make sure I answer these 4 key questions and I have all my capitalization and everything correct, ChatGPT can do it in 30 seconds. And I agree with you 100% that the thing that is going to make or break our children is the ability to use our voice. But a lot of writing curriculums kill our children's voice. And that's why I love Charlotte Mason's approach of, she didn't start composition lessons to high school. They had composition lessons. So they're learning these different writing genres and things that you're talking about in high school. But until then, they're using their voice. This is what I thought of the story. This is what's so important. This is the thing that mattered. And they're talking. But I do think often we can focus on narrating the story and we miss that personal narrative. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is super helpful. Today's episode is brought to you by A Gentle Feast. A Gentle Feast offers a complete living books curriculum an award-winning early reading program, and more tools to equip you to apply Charlotte Mason's timeless philosophy into your modern homeschool. Go to agentlefeast.com to check it out. Smooth and easy days are closer than you think.
One can go into the other really easily.
Explain
Like
that.
you
I love
can
that. Hear
leave
that.
from narrating or doing a narration to a personal narrative. I think that'd be really easy to do, even just verbally with younger kids.
What did you think, or how does that relate to you? Is that what you are referring to?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's move more into this. Now it's the big deal and it's high school and it counts and we got to get them ready for college. So how do we learn some of these writing genres and styles that are more analytical?
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing is if you have control over the curriculum, or some agency over what they do. I know some people like sign up for online curriculum or do different kinds of things, but if you have some ability to change things up, shake things up, or you're just creating it yourself. Let's just say you're just reading through great books together and you're doing it yourself. And I know a lot of homeschool moms do that. I say moms, I should say parents, because I know there's homeschool dads out there too. But we need to be, this is just piggybacking off of what you just said. We need to be creative with our writing prompts. I think prompts are really important as far as students want to write about what they care about. And so when for example, I keep on using Frankenstein as an example because that's just what I finished up with students last semester. But we learned about persuasive writing with Frankenstein because there's this wonderful scene where the creature comes to his creator and he uses Aristotle's three rhetorical appeals. And so we learned about ethos, pathos, logos. We learned how it's used in our world now. We did analyze, but together in discussion, not as in this is the right answer, but looked for and broke down the creature's arguments and looked at how he used them. And then they wrote their own paper using persuasive techniques and the rhetorical appeals. I gave them I think it was 7 prompts. It was somewhere around 6 or 7 prompts. They were all quite different from each other. One of them, which is, it probably was the more generic of them, but students love this topic, was just who is the monster in Frankenstein? Argue for who is the real monster in Frankenstein. And of course, that is something that they would be able to go find on ChatGPT. Some of them were more interesting and I'm sorry, that is interesting, but more unique, I should say, more unique. But I think giving them prompts that they care about, and then I also typically invite them to create a prompt. And sometimes we do that together as a class. Sometimes I give them the option. I do this with creative projects as well. Give them the option to propose a prompt for me. This is the thing I really care about. Can I write about this? And then you are giving them the agency to explore and argue or defend an idea that is something that means something to them. Yes. And therefore they care about it and they don't want to cheat. They don't want to go type it in ChatGPT because they care about it. Again, it's buy-in. And I'm saying the same thing in a different way, same song, second verse. So that's the first thing, is as much creativity and that you can have, and just open-ended types of prompts that give them a lot of freedom. They make them think, but they allow them to write about something they care about. The second thing that I think is incredibly important is to emphasize the stages of strong analytical writing and really strong writing in general. And that it is very rare that you're going to have this beautifully well-crafted, defended, logically structured with a logical progression of ideas paper. Right. The first time you sit down at a computer. That's not how that happens. And I typically tell my students that fuzzy thinking creates fuzzy writing, and that we have to crystallize and clarify our own ideas and then really think about how to defend them to be able to then get that down or type that out on paper or on the screen. And so brainstorming, outline, draft, revision. And for some people, this may be because it might have been really formulaic or really pounded on them to do it just this exact way. And I will say that a lot of English teachers historically will take off points if you don't do it the exact same way I told you to do it.
Yep.
I have heard of English teachers who take off points. They'll have students annotate their reading, and then they'll check their annotations. And if it's not annotated in the exact style that they have taught their students how to annotate, that they'll take off points. Annotation is a personal experience with the text.
Yeah.
There is not a formulaic approach to this. There are some best practices, but this is not something we take off points for if you don't do it exactly the way that teacher told you to do it. Think about whenever you have some big project that you're excited about. Let's say you are going to renovate a space in your home that you're really excited about, like something that is just for you. Actually, Julie and I were just talking before we came on air started recording about my wallpaper behind me, because this little nook space right here was a really specially designed, almost afterthought whenever we were doing some construction on this new place that we moved to this last summer. And whenever you get real jazzed about something that you want to do, you get excited about the research stage.
Oh, yeah.
You Google it and you go down
Pinterest,
rabbit holes. You want to brainstorm. You care. Sometimes we get like sucked into it a little bit too far. We come up for air. Whoa. I've seen students do that with paper topics. And then ultimately it's changed what they want to major in college.
Yes. Wow.
Because they care that much about that topic, because it was something that was driven by their own interest.
Yes.
And then the outline stage is just organizing that and figuring out a logical structure and a progression of ideas. And it does take some strong critical thinking skills, and there's all these different right ways to outline. Ultimately, you'll have the outline up in front of you, but I've known people who start with Post-it notes and put it up, in front of them, because they're very tactile, and that's helpful for them. And then they can, instead of having to erase, they'll move it.
Yeah.
Oh, that point doesn't go under that paragraph. That really needs to be right here.
Yeah.
That goes in the second paragraph. That's the right evidence for that idea. And so care the way you go about it. There's a lot of different right ways, and that's something you could easily Google and find strategies for outlining a persuasive essay or analytical essay or whatever. But it's also pretty intrinsic that we know how to build ideas. Ask a kid to defend a point for why something that they really care about, something that they want, something that they desire, and they'll start outlining reasons. They're not too bad at it when it's something they really care about. And then drafting, and that the first draft will not be perfect. It'll be messy, and be okay with that. Be okay with imperfection, and that realize that we learn that we develop it in stages, and that sometimes you might need to move something. Sometimes, this is one of the things I've seen the most with students, they get real committed to an idea. I see this a lot in narrative, but definitely some in analytical as well. And once the whole paper is developed, that one point or that one idea, or sometimes an entire body paragraph, it just doesn't work. It's not fitting anymore. It's not jiving with the whole progression of ideas and the whole vibe. I'm not really using that word, but they say that, of the whole piece. And so you got to cut it. And that's part of the drafting stage, is knowing what to cut, what's left on the cutting floor.
Yes.
And then revising and revising. I'm sorry, that's part of the revision stage. And then so drafting and revising, and knowing that it often takes 2 or 3 revisions to get something to a point of excellence. And that it's not perfection we're aiming for. I like to say excellence, because I believe that everyone is capable of achieving their own individual excellence and what is best for them. So
I love what you said so much. And I just want to highlight it on a few things, because I feel like that is such a great way to approach it. And hopefully this will give parents some, okay. I love the concept of them coming up with some of their own writing prompts, or having something so open-ended that they could pick from multiple different things about how they're going to narrow it in. One, because it gives the teens ownership, which they need to have at this age, because they're trying to differentiate from you as a parent. And if you don't allow them ownership over some things, they're going to push back on everything. So that is so key. And then Charlotte Mason even says that, allow them to create their own questions, because it's when in the creating the questions that their mind's already creating the answers. And so you don't have to be you don't have to have read the book to come up with 25 questions to ask chapter 7. Like, they can come up with things like that.
Goodness, she was so brilliant.
I know. And then being able to allow them the time to make something excellent. I'm working on a chapter in a book, and I have written about 25 crummy things that I've thrown into the trash can at this point. And I realized that's the process, that
Yeah.
if I just sit down
Yeah.
and I have this expectation, I'm going to type up this chapter and it's going to be perfect on the
Mhm.
first try. I will just sit and stare at the computer screen. And
Yeah.
so our kids get that too, of that fear of, oh, I have to write this 5-paragraph essay. It has to come out of my brain right now. And every week I'm supposed to be churning out a new paper.
Yep.
There's no time. And that's one of the gifts we have as homeschoolers, is we can give them a couple weeks to focus on that, or let's change that, or have a discussion. Don't take a red pen to it and hand it back to them and tell them to go fix it, but actually
Right.
talk through it. Oh, I was a little confused by what you meant in this paragraph about this.
Right.
Or I don't know if this point is really substantial. Do you have any more evidence to support what you're saying here? Work and have those talks with them and allow
Well,
them.
and what you just modeled is perfect feedback. Like you said, I think when you first asked the question is that some parents feel like they're not good writers and so they can't give, good feedback. But you read and you know what
Yeah,
good
right.
writing looks like,
Yeah.
and you've read good stories and you know what makes a good argument. It's
Mm.
not about you having the knowledge to be able to get everything right. We've got to get out of our mind that there is a one right way to do this, one right way. There's not. There are so many right ways. Actually, English is one of the only, if not the only, core subject matter that's like that, where that with science and with math, there is
Yeah,
right
right.
and there is wrong.
Yes.
It is black and it is white. And it is not this way with English. There's a wealth of rightness. And
Yes.
that's so exciting. And
Yeah.
so I take the Socratic approach with both the way that I lead class discussions, but also the way that I try to encourage students in their writing. So I try really hard not to bleed over their writing. And sometimes I do point out to them repeated grammatical errors and things like that. But I tell them I'm not going to emphasize that when I give them feedback. I ask questions. I said, and then you just did that when you were giving an example, that I say, tell me a little bit more about what you meant right here. I was a bit confused. Can you explain? Can you ask, the term I use a lot is unpack. Can you unpack this idea?
Yep.
Or I point out what they're doing great. They need to know that. Every student draft has something strong about it. So you find it. You find what is good and you lead with that. You're like, oh, I love that sentence.
Yes.
There have been papers that I've seen that are weak. They're weak in the rough draft stage, but that does not mean that they're going to end up weak. And I'll say, I love that word choice. That word is awesome right there. And oh, I picked a good word.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there anything else you can think of in terms of getting a child ready for college English that you wanted to focus on in high school that we might not have discussed?
Try to keep the curiosity alive. In preparation for our discussion today, I actually messaged two of my good friends who are college professors. And I asked them a question similar to that. And they were not speaking to just homeschoolers. They were speaking to the freshmen that they saw come into their classes and the amount of students that they've seen over the years. And they both spoke to actually something we already talked about, drafting. Like being comfortable with the messy drafting stages and the fact that your first version of your paper will not be perfect. It sounds like a lot of students are coming into college thinking that it's one and done, essentially. And these good teachers are teaching process, and that forces us to slow down. And our world is moving so fast. And so good thinking and good reading and good writing often requires for us to slow down. Yeah. How to ask good questions. It's not about having all the right answers. It's about being curious and learning how to ask questions. And there are questions that are better than some questions. All questions are valuable if sincerely asked, of course. But at the same time, there are questions that are, and we've been talking a lot about open-ended questions. Those tend to be the higher level ones that cause us to think. How questions, why questions, to what effect, questions that cause us to compare things, one text to another, one character to another, for example, or a character to our own lives, and how to listen to other perspectives and to be a respectful citizen of the classroom, how to listen. And I think this is so important in our current culture.
Yes.
That you can listen and respect someone without agreeing with them.
Yep.
You can give them the dignity of their own voice, and the dignity of their own perspective while acknowledging that yours is different. And this is something in so many spaces, it's not being modeled well right now by adults in their lives.
Right.
And in a safe and nurtured college classroom, I would hope class in general, I hope this happens in my class. That is something that's really important.
Yeah, I think it's so important in the homeschool too, right?
Mhm.
Especially as they're teenagers, they're gonna say
Mhm.
stuff that you don't agree with.
Yeah,
And it is not your job to convince them to think how you think. And
right.
it's so scary sometimes to let them go and sit
Yeah.
in their opinions and in their thought. Like you were saying, I just try to be curious. Huh, that's interesting perspective on that. Or oh,
Yeah.
that's an interesting
Tell me more
argument.
about
Yeah.
that.
And inside of my stomach's like,
Yep.
but if you shut that down and be like, oh
Mhm.
wait, no, that's not right. Let me tell you why that's wrong. And here's the 5
Mhm.
points of why that doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
They will no longer share their thoughts and opinions.
Mm-mm. No, and they're not going to feel safe with you. It'll affect the entire class dynamic, to be honest. You have one student like that in the class, and that will change the dynamic. But then if we're only capable of having discussions with people who think exactly like us, we're going to have a pretty narrow view of the world.
Yeah, and I
Just
think
like I
that's
was
what's
talking
so
about
beautiful about narration too. If
it
you're doing it
is.
well, your child
Mm-hmm.
has learned to articulate their opinion, give
Yes.
evidence for why they're saying
Mhm.
what they're saying orally
That's
their whole
right.
lives. And so by the time they have to get to like a college class,
Yes.
good at that. But you modeling, listening to them every day, share what they're
Mm-hmm.
saying without interrupting,
Mm-hmm.
correcting,
Yeah.
judging, I really do feel like they develop that skill, which like you're saying, these college professors are looking for, to be able to
Right.
hold space to listen to other people as well.
Yes. And then, like you said, be able to of course, we want them to be able to confidently voice their own opinions and perspectives and interpretations. And of course, we want that. And to have the confidence to do that, but to do it in a way that definitely has evidence supporting it and has substance behind it, isn't
Yes.
just these loosey-goosey
Rhetoric.
opinions all over the
Yes.
place, being able to support it and to assert it while confidently, kindly.
Mm.
I think that's super important. The other thing I will say my professor friends told me is to, at that level, once they're moving to the collegiate level, to move beyond summarizing text and start learning how to synthesize. And that's something that, especially if you're having discussions about literature, that's gonna start coming more naturally to them. And that's whenever they're pulling in ideas from all the things that they've read and learned and start synthesizing them together and not just parroting one opinion.
That's
That
what
is higher
Charlotte
level
Mason said,
thinking.
right?
Mhm.
Education is the science of relations.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's starting to really form their own ideas and start learning how to synthesize those ideas that have come before them and with their own thinking. And
That's
that's
why
so
they need
important.
those ideas, right? Because I think a lot of people are just, like you're saying, they're just taking the things that they hear out in the world and they're just
Mhm.
repeating them. And they're not able to think critically for themselves. They've been so
Mhm.
spoon-fed everything their whole lives in our modern education system that they're just regurgitating all of that back out and they can't actually
Right.
form their own opinions. But in
Right.
order to form your own ideas and opinions, you have to be filled with lots of different good ideas and opinions and different perspectives.
Beautiful things, right? The good,
Yes,
beautiful, and true things.
exactly. 100%. That's
That's right. The
great.
feast.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's such a
I love
great
it.
note to end
Mhm.
on. But before we end, tell us about your programs, what you offer so people can check you out.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. So I've got several things in the works that I'm so excited about. Right now, I'm about to launch into the next semester. So I teach students in my home and online. So I have online, and those are live classes that we meet weekly. And then I do a semester by semester curriculum, knowing that homeschool families need some flexibility. You only have to commit to one semester at a time. This semester, spring semester, is starting next week. I'm so excited. I'm working on that curriculum right now. And then coming in this spring, I am working on an e-course, a digital course that is going to be really helping students in the process of learning how to and exploring how to read literature well and how to love it. And so this is something I'm really thinking on a lot, is so much of what we talked about today, but then also actual, really practical, nuanced, let me walk you through, let me show you and guide you the process of this. And then tools that can be in their tool belt so that they can pick up any great book and be able to read it well. And I'm excited about working on that.
Yeah,
And then I'm planning on having some summer camps this summer and some courses that are short form courses that are just like 1 week or 2 weeks. And then also, really, for anyone who has a junior or senior, I am going to offer a senior college application essay boot camp this
awesome.
summer, probably in July. The prompts for the Common App aren't released till August 1, but we typically know there's typically know the majority of what's coming and can work with previous year's prompts. And I am really excited about that. I've worked with a lot of students with their college application essays. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually, because it's such an important transitional season of life and making big decisions. Yeah.
Where can they
So it's
find
where
your
so many of
class
these things
at?
we've talked about comes together, and it's just
Sure.
really, it's really a beautiful moment. But they're also very nervous about it. And then I'm having fun on Instagram. I have a lot of things I've planned as far as just sharing ideas and tips if you want to follow along there at Storyweaver Co. So yeah.
Yeah, so we'll
Thank you
link that
so
into the show
much.
notes, Storyweaver Co. if they want to go check out your class offerings, because I know
Okay.
you are such a great teacher and knowledgeable, but also able to put things in really practical terms and display your love in a way that is engaging and inviting for students and adults as well. So I did one of your adult classes, so that was fun. So thank you so
Oh,
much, Callie, for
it was
taking the time to
awesome.
talk to us. I really hope that I really feel like this will give a much breath of fresh air and a different
Yeah,
perspective of
I
looking at
hope.
high school English. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're so welcome, Julie. I've loved getting to know you, and I've loved this time together. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, please heart it down below and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment and let me know what you learned in today's episode. I'd love to hear from you.